Welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I'm Paula Eddie Wilcox, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest for the second time, where we're looking at their take on the game and leadership aspect of the podcast. Who knows what we might find out, because we all look at this differently, and it's always so interesting to see what the guests have in store for me when I turn up, because we never plan this in advance. So I hope you're as excited as me. Let's get into it, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. And for the second time, we are welcoming back David Charlton, sports psychologist. Welcome today.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm looking forward to building on part one.
Oh, fantastic. And my goodness me, what all sorts of different things that we spoke about in your first episode with us, David. Absolutely fascinating. So I cannot wait to see what your take is, or hear rather, what your take is on game and leadership. So please do, let's dig in.
Okay, so you alluded to the fact I'm a sports psychologist. So to me, game rings really true with sport, essentially. So, be it matches, competitive events, and I suppose the leadership piece in all of this. People in sport certainly have a big focus on outcomes, on results, on winning, on losing. So it's the extrinsic side of things. And that can cause issues, essentially. I would say, probably 95% of the people that I'll work with, from the kid up to the senior professional, will most likely be coming to us because they train, they practice really well, but they just can't put it together under pressure, and it's because of that focus in the wrong place.
Oh, fascinating. Oh, I feel that we've got a bit of a learning session coming on here, David. I think you're going to share some lovely nuggets of fantastic learning with us.
I'm going to try and do my best, yeah.
Well, thank you in advance. So I'd say to everybody, whatever you're doing, put it down and pay attention. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so where do you want to start?
Right, I'm going to start with expectation levels. So the high performer will likely have high expectations of themselves, which, let's face it, it's a good thing. It drives them, it gets them out of bed, it has them determined, motivated, all of the rest of it. However, if those high expectations are really strict, black and white, and often unrealistic and placed in the wrong place, then it's going to cause them issues with their confidence to be able to perform under pressure. So a question I would often ask an athlete would be, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll focus on I'm going to go with football because the World Cup's on, and it's probably one of the biggest sports that I work in. So I would say to the footballer, you've got a match on Saturday. What is success to you? And guaranteed what the response is likely to be as well. The team wins, and they might tell me the score 2-0, and I perform well. Simple. That is success. And it's a normal answer. It's, I suppose, the type of answer you would expect from a sports person.
Yeah.
Well, then my role is to strip that back. Firstly, the team wins. Well, if you think about let's go with a chocolate cake for argument's sake. On a football team, there's 11 players on each side. There's a referee, there's a coaching staff, there's substitutes. So all in all, there's about 30 people involved. So if we think of the chocolate cake, if you slice it up into 30 slices, the player is only really, he or she is just one tiny slice of that cake. So basically what I'm getting at is they cannot really control the the outcome, the result. And then when it comes down to their performance, they only have a small degree of control over their performance in some ways, because the opposition can stop them performing. Their teammates may not give them the football to be able to perform. The referee might be biased. Tactics might not be set up for them. So essentially, what my role is there is to help them take personal leadership of how they're going to help the team the best they possibly can and perform to their best. And how we do that, we would break it down into just simple little processes. So, I'll continue on this theme for a minute or so. So, if people are familiar with football, then a striker is the person who looks to try and put the ball in the back of the net and win the game for the team. So, for the striker to be able to do that, they need to just do very basic, simple things. They need to use their mouth for starters and ask for the ball. Yeah. They need to move around into spaces, be on their toes in order to be available to receive the ball. And then they've got to be brave, essentially, and make quick, instantaneous decisions. Now, if you ask any striker if what success is going to be in the match at the weekend, and if you mention those three things: moving about, opening your mouth to ask for the ball, and the last one I've forgotten.
I'm so engrossed. I'm like,
We'll go with those two anyway.
Yeah, we'll go with the two.
Yeah. Those two things are achievable. They're under your control. You can do that. Nobody else can move your feet for you. Nobody else can move your mouth. It feels a lot more achievable and attainable than winning the game, which often would then mean, if the team went 1-0 or 2-0 down early in a game, their heads drop, they give up, or they lose confidence, etc. So yeah, that's one little takeaway.
I love that, David, and I sort of resonate with that massively in terms of how I work with my clients, and I talk to them about breaking down this big scary goal that they don't even dare to dream they could achieve, whatever that might be, whether it's changing, getting promoted, changing to another job, achieving life's ambition of moving abroad, it could be anything. And it's breaking it down into what I call those ridiculously small steps, so ridiculously small, you can't help but achieve them. Therefore, then, as you're building up those tiny steps and you're celebrating those tiny wins along the way, very quickly you've made a significant chunk of progress towards this big scary thing over here that you wanted, that now doesn't quite feel so, tickly throat, doesn't feel quite so scary anymore.
Exactly, and that's exactly what you're doing. I suppose moving on from that as well, what I tend to ask a follow-up question is, what is failure to you? Just to check their understanding. And the person who gets it would say to me, well, it would be standing still. That's failure. It's being quiet. But the amount of people who actually then say, well, failure would be losing the game and performing poorly. It's like, right, okay, I've got a bit of work to do here.
It keeps you out of mischief, David. What can I say?
It certainly does. And like moving on to expectations as well, when I talked about like faulty expectations, so if we'll stick with the football theme. So prominent people who know football, prominent footballers would be a Harry Kane, a Mo Salah as strikers. They play for Liverpool and Tottenham. They're very good at what they do, to say the least. Now, if I was to ask a striker, how many times out of 10 do you think you should score? For them personally, that they would tell me like 7-8 times out of 10. Now, if you actually look at statistics, these two guys, Harry Kane and Mo Salah, they actually only score somewhere between 1 and 2 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
So they're actually missing 8 to 9 times out of 10. Yet nothing changes in their desire on the pitch. You know, their heads don't drop. They don't hide. Their communication's still the same. They're still asking for the ball. Their confidence remains intact. So the message then goes back to, again, just those key little processes. And I suppose from a mindset perspective, it's that perseverance till the bitter end. No matter how badly you start, how difficult it gets, you just got to be relentless in your pursuit of excellence, essentially.
Yeah, I love this, David. It's so beautifully linked to fixed and growth mindset, which of course we both know a fair bit about, but I know you know an awful lot more than I do. But you know, in its basic form, that ability to see failure as a learning and how, you know, pick yourself up and try again. What can I learn from that goal that I just tried to score that didn't hit? Okay, I need to be 3 steps to the right to try again at the same angle, and then it will go in next time, or whatever it is. You know, I'm really dumbing it down here, but you get the picture.
Yeah, well, actually, we'll continue on that theme as well. So another big thing I notice in my world in sport, which I know for a fact overlaps into business, is especially I would say the young professional with social media these days they'll be like following the like players of a similar ilk or players they've grown up with, people they respect. They'll be following statistics religiously. And what happens is, rather than, as you say, when it comes down to growth mindset, rather than learning from other people and maybe striving, asking themselves good questions on how they can get there, they get into what I call as comparison mode. And then that becomes self-criticism, etc. And yeah, I know from like my journey into sports psychology how I was guilty of that from time to time, where I mean, I came into it in my early 30s with a mortgage and like quite a lot of pressure. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to get from A to B pretty quickly. And I was always like looking at people, and yes, I was learning like from them, but also, you know, you can't but help but notice someone who you want to aspire to get to might have 10,000 followers on Instagram or something like that, and have 5 books and all of this sort of thing, and seem to be doing keynote after keynote and things like that. And yeah, I think that I would say that, I'm not saying it slowed my progress, but it certainly didn't help my mental health on occasions.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you know, this comes up so many times in the chats that I have with different leaders. You know, that comparisonitis is the thief of all joy. Basically, you know, all you're doing is making yourself miserable in a way, because what you're not seeing is that there's this, you know, let's say it's another sports psychologist who's got all the top athletes in a particular, you know, football team, or, you know, the cream of the crop from Liverpool, Manchester United, and whatever the other one was, Tottenham, you said, I think earlier. You know, there, as you can see, I'm not great with football, but, you know, I'm doing my best. So, you know, you want the cream of the crop, and what we're seeing is that they're there already. What we're not seeing is what it took to get them to that point. Which is why it's so helpful to see that big, scary goal of where you want to be, but then understand and work through, working backwards, if you like, from the end goal. You know, in my brain, that works really well for me. What's it going to take to get over there to where I want to be? How do I need to break that down? You know, what support do I need to help me get there? All of those great questions that we go through when we're planning these sorts of things.
Yeah, and I would say what I've learned about that one is, I mean, I'm I'm like you in that respect. I am the bigger picture thinker and very resourceful in that way, and I've done that with my career throughout. But there's so many people out there who they don't look past the next day or the next week. So being able to actually help give them a fresh perspective by seeing things from different angles and opening up their, I suppose, their aspirations and their ambitions is a big part of my role. And as a leader, it's got to be something that you try to help people with.
Mm.
But you do have to recognize, again, that whole thing about individual differences and people, and then the way people, I suppose, view their goals and they go about things. I mean, on this sort of goal setting piece as well, one thing I notice a lot is, like, sometimes people have these big lofty goals, but what they fail to do is they don't think about the challenges that they're going to face upstream, and then when they are faced with a challenge, then things go pear-shaped, and you often see that type of person won't grit it out and persevere. They'll be on to something else and not finish. Actually, I'm going to share an example on this one. So a client I worked with, it was a long-term client, but a couple of years ago was leading a championship in motor racing with 3 races to go. And this was it was a big championship, and they had quite a large lead. It was about 30 points, I think it was. The third off last race, they had a mechanical problem, and the guy who was second in the championship won the race. So the lead was cut quite a lot. The second off last race, I think they finished something like 4th. The other guy finished 2nd, so made up some more points. So going into the last race, there was a very, very narrow gap. He was still ahead, but there wasn't a great deal. And there was 2 weeks between that race and then the second off last race and the last race. So I got a phone call about a week before saying, look, I haven't hardly slept for a week. I think I've thrown this away. It's going to mess up my whole future. And career was on the line and all this sort of thing. He wasn't in tears, but he wasn't far off it. Yeah. So we did a session, and you don't hear this one very often, but he said to me, I want you to take me to a really deep, dark place. I want you to help me realize what it's going to be like if I throw away this championship. So we spent an hour where we talked about it, and we did a whole lot of visualization exercises on everything that could possibly go wrong in this final race, and then how he would actually respond to it accordingly in the race if necessary. So he was completely mentally prepared, and he loved it. He came away, he was much calmer, was grateful for the session, and then the race. So the final race comes, and this is quite amusing. So he was something like 2nd on the grid, and his rival was about 3rd or 4th on the grid. So they'd done well in qualifying. And his rival got knocked off the bike on the first corner, 10 seconds into the race. He was fine. He was okay, thankfully. But what that meant was within 10 seconds of the race, he'd won the championship because he was still on the bike. Yeah. So all of that worrying for 2 weeks was a waste of time. But I mean, essentially, he prepared for absolutely everything. And as I say, you don't get many people like that. But it's essential, I think.
It's absolutely fascinating how different people need and choose to prepare for these sorts of things. So essentially all he had to do was stay on the bike for the race.
That was the way it worked. He basically spent the whole of the race. He didn't even need to stay on the bike. He could have just pulled off to the side and said thank you very much because he'd won because the other guy had come off. But yeah, he just, I suppose, he spent the race relaxed and in celebratory mode. I think from what I remember, it was a case of, well, do I try to win the race or do I just try and stay on the bike, with like motorsport being such a dangerous sport? So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think he finished about third or fourth, something like that. But yeah, as I say, you don't get many people who are like that. And that was something I really admired about him. There's something about just like facing your fears in the face, being like really, really honest with yourself. And certainly in sport, I find that whether you're an athlete or in a leadership role in coaching, there's not a lot of people who will be honest with themselves. I suppose what our classes do as they're keen to move on to the next thing or try the next quick fix. They're frightened to look in the mirror.
Yeah, that's a really great point, David. And I think it's about really putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, isn't it? And admitting what might go wrong, to enable you then to be able to, as you rightly say, you broke down all the different scenarios and being equipped to deal with those because you've already worked it out in your head as to how you're going to handle it. And I think it takes a certain kind of person to really put themselves out there, put themselves through that, because in that sense, it's mentally tough in itself, the strain that it puts on you. Because, I guess that our brains are amazing things, aren't they? And I'm definitely no scientist or psychologist, but there's something in there for me about, you put yourself through the scenario plan. Therefore, and if it's visualization and it's vivid enough for you, if it happens on the day, it's almost like you've done it before and you came out the other side and I'm okay. So I know I've got this.
Exactly. And again, I think, going on to most athletes will be probably into doing some form of visualization. It's just, it's generally a skill that they have. However, a high percentage will do it by themselves and they're not doing it in a strategic way. It's literally, they're lying on the sofa, they're closing their eyes for a few minutes, they're dreaming about having the best game of their life or the best race of their life. Simple as that. But this is taking it to that next level, and that is what the top performer does. Fine, see yourself at your best, but certainly with the right support, you play into the senses, what people are going to hear on those occasions, as well as obviously what they're going to see, but what they're going to feel. And you really try and ramp up the emotions as you go through that type of exercise. And in sport, I mean, certainly in motorsport, it's so fast paced, but in sport in general, if you're a fighter in combat sports or a cricketer, things just happen in the blink of an eye. So in a sense, what you're doing with visualization, you're programming the unconscious, so the subconscious part of your brain to be able to respond and react in these quick fire situations. So for anybody who's into their sport and wants to get better, definitely I'd recommend visualization, and a form of sports hypnosis too.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. So, well, obviously with all of my podcasts, the guest contact details are below, and David's no exception. You'll have his social posts, and I'll encourage you to share your podcast link as well, David, because if they're interested in more around the mental toughness space, what it takes to be a high performer and really play that game of leadership to its highest level, you're the man to help support them do that. And, I'm so grateful for the fantastic sort of angles that you've shared with us today. I mean, goodness me, I never thought I'd be sitting here talking about, really digging into the psychology of scenario planning and visualization, for example. I mean, how fascinating is that? And the lovely piece about that is that, as you said, if you've got the right support to help you do that, anything is possible.
Yeah. And it all starts with personal leadership, essentially, isn't it? It's you taking responsibility, right? This is what I want to achieve. That's my destiny. Right? I'm going to go out and get it by doing A, B, and C.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people, have a go at doing it on their own. But boy, when you've got your cheerleaders and your supporters around you and the right guide, it's a much more fun and a much more focused journey, I would say.
Yeah. Don't. We'll be going on for another 10 or 15 minutes on focus and efficiency. So yeah, that's that one.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, well, there's no two ways about it, David. We're going to have you on again at some point in the future, aren't we? So that we can dig into some of this other fascinating stuff. But for today, thank you so much. Again, you've just shared some fantastic stuff here today. And, we're way over 30 episodes into the podcast. Not one guest has shared a similar take on game and leadership. I love this episode for that reason alone, if nothing else. It's just fascinating seeing, getting insight into how you see things, and bringing that fantastic uniqueness. So thank you so much for today, David.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, and I look forward to sharing some vulnerabilities in the next one.
Oh, super. Absolutely. On that theme of vulnerability, your pivotal moments, and we'll be looking at those next week. But for today, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I always think the game episode is one of my favourites because we get a real insight to our guests' take on their ideas of how games and leadership fit together. Every one of them is different, and just when I think there isn't another take that we haven't thought of or covered, one of our guests comes up with something totally different and unique. It's really exciting. Look, now it's your turn. See what you think, see what resonated with you most, and as always, I encourage you to reflect on what you've heard and see what that might mean for your leadership moving forwards. I'm Paula Eddie Wilcox, and this is Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I really look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye for now.